Earth, a beautiful planet filled with life. A place that is home to plants, animals, and people, all living separate, unattached lives that have no relationship at all to one another. Like this happy little otter, he has everything to make his life perfect. He doesn't need anything or anyone else to survive.
Yeah, right. Actually, every living creature on the planet is connected to and dependent on every other creature in some way. When animals depend on one another, we say that they are interdependent. So come on, let's see why this is, what it means, and how it works. Sun, air, water, soil, plants, and animals have connections, or relationships, that make life possible. This complex series of relationships between living and non-living things makes up what is called the ecosystem. All the parts or relationships in the ecosystem are necessary for the ecosystem to continue. But it's the relationships, or interdependencies, among the animals that are really fascinating. Animals have a variety of needs and have developed a variety of interdependencies to satisfy those needs. For example, you know some animals eat other animals. This shark is dependent on the fish it eats. But are the fish dependent on the shark? Yes, they are, as you'll soon see. In addition to being dependent on other animals for food, there are other relationships in which different kinds of animals, different species, also depend on each other for shelter, defense, and even help with reproduction. And animals of the same species often depend on each other's cooperation to satisfy their needs. Let's take a look at these different types of animal interdependency. We'll start with one of the most obvious and most important, the food chain. You may have heard of the food chain. If you have, then you know the sun is the ultimate source of energy on the earth. The sun shines down on plants. The plants, using the process of photosynthesis, convert the energy of sunlight into food. The plants combine carbon dioxide from the air, minerals from the soil, and water to make sugars that are stored in the plant's tissues. The word photosynthesis actually means making things from light. Animals depend on these sugars for energy when they eat the plants. Plants are the first part of the food chain. Because they produce the food, plants are called producers. In the next step in the food chain, plant-eating animals, or herbivores, get some of the energy by eating the plants. Those herbivores then become food for other animals, called carnivores, that eat meat. Carnivores and herbivores are both consumers, depending on either plants or animals to live. Carnivores that hunt, kill, and eat other animals are also called predators. The animals they eat are called prey. When a mountain lion catches a badger, the mountain lion is the predator and the badger is the prey. Scavengers, like hyenas and vultures, eat animals they find that are already dead. The ecosystem depends upon these scavengers to clear away dead animals that would otherwise stay on the ground, rotting and creating disease. We know wolves are carnivores that eat animals like elk. But what if something happened and there were no wolves left to eat elk? Wouldn't that be good for the elk? Not in the long run. Without wolves to eat them, the number of elk would grow and grow until there wasn't enough grass to feed them. Then many of the elk would starve. There would be fewer of them than there were before. As you see, the wolf and elk depend on each other. They are interdependent. There are other ways that a predator helps its prey besides keeping animal populations balanced. Remember the shark and the fish we mentioned earlier? Well, most healthy fish can escape sharks pretty easily. As a result, the shark usually eats fish that are sick, injured, or old and weak. This improves the chance that the fish population will remain hardy, because only the strong and healthy fish are left to reproduce. The shark depends on the smaller fish for food, and the smaller fish depend on the shark to eat the weak and sick of their species so that only the strongest of their species survive. The shark and fish are interdependent. So interdependencies exist in both the environment of the ocean and on land. In fact, they exist everywhere, even in the soil. You see, the food chain doesn't end when the wolf eats the elk. After the wolf has digested the elk, the waste from the wolf's body is broken down by the decomposers, which get their energy from the waste. The decomposers include insects like maggots, as well as living microscopic creatures such as bacteria. Do the decomposers depend on the herbivores and carnivores? Sure they do. The herbivores and carnivores provide waste for the decomposers to eat and use for energy. Do the herbivores and carnivores depend on the decomposers? You bet. When the decomposers are through, all that's left are minerals that are absorbed into the soil. But the plants use the minerals from the waste to help them grow. The plants are eaten by herbivores, and the endless cycle of interdependency continues. If you could draw a picture of all the eating patterns of the animals in an ecosystem, it would be much more complicated than just a few separate food chains. Because many animals eat more than one kind of food, hundreds of food chains would crisscross, creating what is called a food web, showing that interdependency isn't always as simple as one animal eating another. Now let's take a look at some other kinds of animal interdependencies.
Look out, we can't see the screen! Get out! Get out!
We've seen how animals are dependent on each other in the food chain, but there are other interdependencies that relate to the environment that certain animals share. Today, our experiment will focus on one of these interdependencies. Between a goldfish and a freshwater fish known as the plecostomus, the living vacuum. This experiment takes a few days to complete. During this time, we will observe and take notes on how these two fish are dependent on each other. For the experiment, you will need 2 small aquariums with lids filled with water, water conditioner, gravel, aquarium plants, 2 aquarium thermometers, algae growth stimulator, 2 goldfish, fish food, a pad and pen, and 1 catfish, also called a plecostomus. Most of these materials can be found at your local pet store, but you might want to ask an adult for help in obtaining them. First, set up both tanks by filling each of the 2 with fresh water. If you are using water from the faucet, be sure to add some water conditioner to it. Place the thermometers on the tanks. Set the tanks in a warm area or add a heater to the aquariums to keep the temperature around 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Add equal amounts of gravel and plants to both tanks. Then add some of the algae growth stimulator to both tanks. Let the tank sit for an hour, and then add 1 goldfish to each tank. If your goldfish came in plastic bags, let the goldfish sit in their bags at the surface of the water for 10 minutes so that they can get used to the temperature of their new aquarium. Now you can introduce the plecostomus, our living vacuum fish, into one of the tanks. Be sure to let its bag float for 10 minutes, just as you did with the goldfish. You will be observing and recording both goldfish and plecostomus behavior and the condition of the tank every other day for the next week. Be sure to feed your goldfish a pinch of food each day. Each day, look to see how much of the fish food the goldfish are eating compared to the plecostomus. Record on your pad whether or not the plecostomus was seen eating the fish food. You should find that the plecostomus did not eat any of the fish food at all. So how is it feeding itself? You'll probably notice that the plecostomus spent most of its time on the glass of the aquarium. But what is it doing? Record your hypothesis, or educated guess, on another piece of paper. Continue to check your tanks daily, noting and recording the observations you make. After 4 or 5 days, you might notice a buildup of green algae inside one of the tanks. Each day, look to see how much algae growth there is in the aquarium that contains the Plecostomus as compared to the other aquarium. Is the algae growth in this tank heavier or lighter? Record your results. Also observe the behavior of the goldfish over time. Which goldfish appears to be more active? The one that is in the tank with the Plecostomus or the one that is alone? You should notice that the tank containing the Plecostomus appeared to have less algae and waste buildup than the tank without it. This is because the Plecostomus meets its need for food by eating waste and algae alone. Although this buildup of algae will not hurt the goldfish, an excessive amount of algae is not recommended and would be detrimental to the goldfish in a pond environment. When two organisms, like the goldfish and Plecostomus, share a relationship, it's called symbiosis. The contribution of the Plecostomus and the interdependency between the two allows the goldfish to live in a clean, healthy environment while the Plecostomus gets a full meal. Now that's animal interdependency.
When two organisms from different species share a relationship, it's called symbiosis. Symbiotic relationships can relate to either food, shelter, defense, or reproduction. Or they can relate to more than one of these things. There are different types of symbiosis. In one kind of symbiosis, only one of the two animals involved gains any benefit or reward from the relationship. The other animal is actually harmed. This kind of symbiosis is called parasitism, and the animals gaining the benefit are known as parasites. A parasite is an organism that gains food, and often shelter and protection as well, from another animal called the host. The parasite can live either inside or outside of the host's body. Since the word ecto means outside, parasites that live outside the host's body are called ectoparasites. A dog with fleas is a good example. This flea benefits greatly from living on this dog. It bites the dog and sucks its blood. The dog suffers, getting itchy skin and rashes from the flea bites. The tapeworm is an endoparasite, which means that it lives inside the host's body. There it steals nourishment from the host's intestines and can eventually kill the host. Many parasites, like this tapeworm, cannot survive without a host. Some types of symbiosis provide benefits to one organism without harming or benefiting the other. We call this commensalism. In some partnerships, only one partner seems to gain anything. The remora is a fish that rides on sharks. It feeds on scraps from the shark's food. It doesn't harm the shark, so it's not a parasite. The remora may also get protection from larger fish by staying close to the shark. This bird, called the cattle egret, is getting more than just a free ride from this elephant. It is also getting food. As the elephant walks, it stirs insects from the grass that the bird snaps up happily. Also, there are probably few animals that would attempt to attack the cattle egret while it is near an elephant. This worm spends its life hiding in the arms of this sea star. The worm is protected and gets food from the sea star's leftovers. The sea star doesn't get anything back, but it's not harmed. Why would the African weaver birds build their nests directly over a nest of wasps? The wasps provide a very effective protection for the weaver bird. Their presence drives away animals that might want to eat the weaver bird babies. The weaver birds are not harmed by the wasps because the wasps get used to having the weaver birds around and pay little attention to them. This is an example of commensalism. One animal benefits, while the other neither benefits nor is harmed. The animal that benefits is dependent on the other. If both of the parties involved get something out of the relationship, we call it mutualism. There are lots of ways animals depend on each other. For instance, ants have huge numbers of ant colony occupants living in the same nest. The social behavior of ants makes them ideal partners in give-and-take relationships, even with other species of insects. These ants are taking care of their cows. Their cows are actually insects called aphids. The aphids give off a milky substance called honeydew that the ants love to drink. The ants actually stroke the aphids with their antennae to milk the aphids for their honeydew. The ants depend on the aphids for this food, and the aphids depend on the ants for protection from other insects that might eat them. This is mutualism, and the ants and aphids are interdependent. This clownfish lives among the poisonous tentacles of the sea anemone. In return for protection, the clownfish attracts other fish for the anemone to eat and feeds on the scraps dropped by the anemone. Here's an example of mutualism that might be more familiar. In this relationship, the dog receives praise and reassurance in return for working as a guard. So, in mutualism, both partners in the relationship benefit. The partners are truly interdependent. What's happening here? This is a special relationship between two fish. The smaller fish, a cleaner wrasse, is nibbling at tiny pests that live on the larger grouper. Is this an example of parasitism, commensalism, or mutualism? Well, the tiny pests are parasites on the grouper, but the relationship between the grouper and the wrasse is mutualism because both animals benefit. This wrasse gets food, and the grouper has its pests removed. The wrasse and grouper are interdependent. You've seen many kinds of animal interdependencies, from food chains to the symbiotic relationships of parasitism, commensalism, and mutualism. These have all been relationships between different kinds of animals. But there are interdependencies among members of the same species of animals as well. These relationships are based on cooperation, animals depending on their own kind to survive. For many animals, there's an advantage to living together. It may make life easier and safer. It may make it easier to find food or a mate. Some animals cooperate in the care of different individuals. The ultimate in cooperation is found in some insect societies, where individuals cannot survive alone. Bees provide an excellent example of this insect cooperation. They work together to satisfy their needs for food, shelter, protection, and reproduction. In a beehive, there is a single egg-laying female, the queen, shown here with a yellow mark on her back. She lays eggs at the rate of about 2,000 a day. Female bees that aren't raised to be queens are workers and are unable to breed. Workers are kept busy cleaning the nest. They also make wax for the six-sided cells in which eggs are laid and honey stored. Workers go and get nectar and pollen. Some act as guards, stopping strangers from entering the hive. Worker bees move around the hive, taking on whatever job needs to be handled. The hive's survival depends on each individual, from food gathering to care and feeding of eggs and larvae. This is a cooperative interdependency that helps the colony and the species survive. Animal species that live in groups have an awareness that each is in some manner linked to the other members of the group. In a society of baboons, each individual counts, and one may risk its life to save another. In animal societies, each member must function to benefit the group in some way. There's grooming and delousing to be done. That means picking bugs off your friends. Ooh, fun, fun, fun. As you can see, cooperation helps many species of animals satisfy their needs, whether they're in need of food, shelter, protection, or need to reproduce.
Cooperation between animal species can take some unusual forms, especially when influenced by humans. Take this Bengal tiger, for example, which shares its home with dogs and even hogs. Why are they all getting along? Because they've grown up together at a very unusual zoo in Thailand, the Sriracha Tiger Zoo. Bengal tigers were once numerous, but now their populations are in danger. The Tiger Zoo is doing something about this by raising Bengal tigers that will someday be released in the wild. Before the young tigers are fully grown, many are relocated to animal preserves, where they are taught the natural behaviors they will one day need to survive in the wild. The zoo has done a pretty good job, as they now have more than 130 tigers. So what's the zoo's secret in raising so many tiger cubs? Well, the zoo has a unique system that allows the tigers to reproduce twice as often. The key to this system is milk. That's right, milk. For the first 10 days after it is born, a baby tiger is allowed to nurse from its mother as it would in the wild. For the next 2 months, the baby tigers only nurse from hogs. The hogs are well fed, and the mother hog doesn't mind sharing her milk with tiger cubs. More importantly, the hog's milk actually helps the tigers grow faster than they would if they drank tiger's milk. Also, removing the nursing tiger cubs from their mother allows her to become pregnant again sooner. Mother tigers at the Tiger Zoo can have 2 litters of cubs each year when otherwise they could only have 1 litter. The baby piglets and tiger cubs get along very well, sharing the mother hog's milk and romping and playing. After 2 months nursing on hog's milk, the tiger cubs are started on a diet of chicken and meat. But they remember the bond they formed as youngsters. That's why grown hogs and tigers can share a home. Because the biggest reason for the decline in wild tiger populations is loss of habitat, the Sriracha Tiger Zoo also assists programs that protect remaining wild tiger habitats. It all helps the Bengal tiger population and makes for some very interesting animal relationships.
Remember, the connection of water, air, soil, plants, and animals is called an ecosystem. All the parts of the ecosystem are vital. If any part fails, the whole system can suffer. For the most part, nature does a fine job of maintaining its balance through many interdependencies among animals. However, when an imbalance occurs, it can take a very long time for life to readjust. Even a change in the weather pattern can result in disaster for those that cannot relocate or adapt over time. It's important to emphasize that humans can have a large effect on animal interdependencies. When a dog serves as a guide dog for a blind person, the dependency is even more important. The blind person's safety depends on the dog. We also have interdependencies with the animals we raise for other work, or for pets. For wild animals, the human relationship can be a different story. Sometimes people unknowingly cause negative effects on the interdependencies of wild animals. For instance, when we cut down forests, we remove shelter and food for many animals, disrupting many food chains. The same thing can happen when we graze our livestock on grass that is also needed by wild animals, or when we use pesticides, killing insects that might be food for other animals. Everything that lives is dependent on other living organisms to exist, just like teams working together. Nature has orchestrated a web of behavior that works to support life on this planet. From simple life forms to complex societies, all life is intertwined. These connections, or interdependencies, make it all work. Just like this guy, no creature can successfully stand alone. That are really fascinating. Animals have a variety of needs and have developed a variety of interdependencies to satisfy those needs. For example, you know some animals eat other animals. This shark is dependent on the fish it eats. But are the fish dependent on the shark? Yes, they are, as you'll soon see. In addition to being dependent on other animals for food, there are other relationships in which different kinds of animals, different species, also depend on each other for shelter, defense, and even help with reproduction. And animals of the same species often depend on each other's cooperation to satisfy their needs. Let's take a look at these different types of animal interdependency. We'll start with one of the most obvious and most important, the food chain. You may have heard of the food chain. Sun, air, water, soil, plants, and animals have connections or relationships that make life possible. This complex series of relationships between living and non-living things makes up what is called the ecosystem. All the parts or relationships in the ecosystem are necessary for the ecosystem to continue. But it's the relationships or interdependencies among the animals. If you have, then you know the sun is the ultimate source of energy on the earth. The sun shines down on plants. The plants, using the process of photosynthesis, convert the energy of sunlight into food. The plants combine carbon dioxide from the air, minerals from the soil, and water to make sugars that are stored in the plant's tissues. The word photosynthesis actually means making things from light. Animals depend on these sugars for energy when they eat the plants. Plants are the first part of the food chain. Because they produce the food, plants are called producers. In the next step in the food chain, plant-eating animals, or herbivores, get some of the energy by eating the plants. Those herbivores then become food for other animals, called carnivores, that eat meat. Carnivores and herbivores are both consumers, depending on either plants or animals to live. Carnivores that hunt, kill, and eat other animals are also called predators. The animals they eat are called prey. When a mountain lion catches a badger, the mountain lion is the predator and the badger is the prey. Scavengers, like hyenas and vultures, eat animals they find that are already dead. The ecosystem depends upon these scavengers to clear away dead animals that would otherwise stay on the ground, rotting and creating disease. We know wolves are carnivores.
Earth, a beautiful planet filled with life. A place that is home to plants, animals, and people, all living separate, unattached lives that have no relationship at all to one another. Like this happy little otter, he has everything to make his life perfect. He doesn't need anything or anyone else to survive.
Yeah, right. Actually, every living creature on the planet is connected to and dependent on every other creature in some way. When animals depend on one another, we say that they are interdependent. So come on, let's see why this is, what it means, and how it works.